The wrench slipped from Elena Vasquez's oil-stained fingers, clattering against the concrete floor of Hangar 7 with a metallic echo that seemed to mock her exhaustion. She'd been working on the same Blackhawk rotor assembly for 14 hours. Straight, her coveralls soaked through with sweat despite the industrial fans that did little more than push the humid Texas air around the cavernous space. Around her, the other mechanics had long since finished their shifts and headed home to families and cold beers, leaving Elena alone with the stubborn piece of machinery that refused to cooperate. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The helicopter loomed above her like a sleeping giant, its rotors folded back in maintenance position. Most people saw these aircraft and thought of power, of rescue missions and military precision. Elena saw something different. She saw the intricate dance of metal and engineering that made flight possible, the delicate balance of forces that could mean the difference between life and death for the crews who trusted these machines with their lives. But tonight, this particular Blackhawk was her nemesis. The rotor head assembly had developed a micro-vibration that showed up on diagnostics but defied every conventional repair attempt. 3 senior mechanics had looked at it over the past week. 2 had declared it within acceptable parameters. The 3rd had recommended a complete rotor replacement that would cost the base nearly half, $1 million, and ground the aircraft for 6 weeks. Elena disagreed. She could feel something in the way the blades moved, a subtle wrongness that spoke to instincts she'd developed over 15 years of working on rotorcraft. The problem wasn't with the major components. It was something smaller, something that everyone else had overlooked because they were focused on the obvious solutions. Elena Vasquez had learned to be invisible by necessity. In a world dominated by men who measured competence by volume and confidence, she'd discovered that quiet expertise often went unnoticed until the moment it became indispensable. At 38, she possessed hands that could diagnose problems. Through touch alone and an understanding of helicopter mechanics that bordered on the mystical. Yet to most people on Fort Meridian Army Base, she was simply the woman who worked the night shift in Hangar 7, fixing the problems that the day crew couldn't solve. The base was home to the 47th Aviation Regiment, a unit responsible for search and rescue operations across the southwestern United States. Their fleet of Blackhawks and Chinooks had saved thousands of lives over the years, pulling people from floods, fires, and disasters that made headlines across the country. But the real heroes, Elena knew, weren't just the pilots who risked their lives in dangerous conditions. They were also the mechanics who ensured those aircraft could perform when everything depended on them. Elena's workspace occupied a corner of Hangar 7 that most people forgot existed. While the main floor bustled with activity during the day shift, her area remained quiet and organized, a testament to her methodical approach to mechanical problems. Toolboards lined the walls with every wrench, screwdriver, and specialized instrument arranged with military precision. A small desk in the corner held technical manuals that looked worn from constant use, their pages marked with handwritten notes and diagrams that represented years of accumulated knowledge. Her reputation among the mechanics was complicated. The younger technicians respected her abilities but found her methods mysterious and old-fashioned. The senior mechanics acknowledged her skills but resented the way she could solve problems that stumped them. The supervisors tolerated her because her work was always perfect, even if they didn't understand how she achieved her results. Elena existed in a professional limbo, too valuable to dismiss, but too different to fully accept. The current rotor problem exemplified this dynamic perfectly. Master Sergeant Frank Morrison, the day shift supervisor, had assigned his best people to the Blackhawk over the past week. Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran with certifications on every aircraft in the inventory, had spent 2 days on the problem before declaring the vibration within acceptable limits. Patterson, fresh from advanced training at the manufacturer's facility, had run every diagnostic test in the manual without finding a definitive cause. Chun, whose reputation for solving impossible problems was legendary throughout the regiment, had recommended the expensive rotor replacement after exhausting all conventional options. But Elena could feel something they'd missed. It wasn't in the big components or the obvious failure points. It was in the subtle interaction between parts, the kind of problem that required not just technical knowledge, but an intuitive understanding of how helicopters wanted to fly. She'd felt this particular vibration pattern once before, 15 years ago, on a different aircraft in a different place. The memory was buried deep in her consciousness, but her hands remembered what her mind had forgotten. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the hangar floor as Elena positioned herself beneath the rotor assembly. She'd removed her safety glasses hours ago, needing to see every detail without distortion. Her fingers traced the complex mechanism that translated engine power into the rotating motion that lifted tons of metal into the sky. Most mechanics approached rotor systems like complex puzzles, breaking them down into component parts and analyzing each piece individually. Elena saw them as living systems where every element affected every other element in ways that couldn't be captured in technical manuals. The microvibration was there, so subtle that the diagnostic equipment barely registered it. But Elena could feel it through the metal, a wrongness that spoke of components operating just slightly out of harmony. She'd spent the first part of her shift following the obvious diagnostic paths, checking torque specifications and clearances, verifying that every bolt was properly tightened and every bearing was correctly lubricated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Everything met specifications, which explained why the other mechanics had found nothing wrong. But specifications told only part of the story. Real aircraft existed in the space between perfect engineering and imperfect reality, where metal, fatigued in unpredictable ways, and tolerances accumulated into problems that defied easy categorization. Elena had learned to read these subtle signs during her early years working on civilian helicopters, where budgets were tight and replacement parts were expensive. Military mechanics had the luxury of following procedures exactly and replacing components at the first sign of wear. Civilian mechanics learned to coax maximum performance from aging equipment, developing instincts that went beyond what any manual could teach. The breakthrough came at 2 in the morning when Elena noticed something that everyone else had overlooked. The rotor head assembly included a series of dampers designed to smooth out vibrations during flight. These components were essentially sophisticated shock absorbers filled with hydraulic fluid and calibrated to specific frequencies. The specifications called for them to be replaced at regular intervals, and according to the maintenance records, all 4 dampers on this aircraft were well within their service limits. But Elena noticed that while the dampers met specifications individually, they weren't perfectly matched as a set. 3 of them had been manufactured by the original equipment supplier, while the 4th was a replacement part from a different vendor. Both types met the same specifications and were approved for use, but Elena's experienced eye caught subtle differences in their construction. The replacement damper was slightly heavier than the originals, with internal components that operated at fractionally different frequencies. Under normal circumstances, this difference would be insignificant. But this particular Blackhawk had been through an unusually demanding deployment 6 months earlier, conducting rescue operations during Hurricane Delilah. The aircraft had logged over 200 flight hours in conditions that pushed every system to its limits. High winds, salt spray, and constant vibration from extended hovering had taken a toll on every component, creating wear patterns that weren't visible in routine inspections. Elena theorized that the mismatched damper, combined with cumulative wear from the hurricane deployment, was creating a harmonic resonance that occurred only under specific conditions. The vibration wasn't constant, which explained why it was so difficult to diagnose. It appeared only when engine RPM, rotor pitch, and atmospheric conditions aligned in a particular way. Most of the time, the aircraft flew normally. But occasionally, the stars aligned and the microvibration appeared, just strong enough to be detected by sensitive instruments, but not strong enough to trigger maintenance protocols. The solution required a delicate touch that went beyond standard repair procedures. Rather than replacing the mismatched damper, which would have been the obvious fix, Elena decided to recalibrate the entire set. She carefully adjusted the hydraulic pressure in each damper, bringing them into perfect harmony with each other. It was a procedure that wasn't covered in any manual, requiring her to use knowledge gained from years of working on aircraft that were too old and too valuable to replace. As she worked, Elena thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. She'd grown up in a small town in New Mexico, where her father ran a crop dusting service with 3 aging helicopters and a philosophy that anything could be fixed if you understood it well enough. From the time she could hold a wrench, Elena had been helping him maintain aircraft that other mechanics had written off as hopeless. She'd learned to see past the obvious problems to the underlying issues, to feel the subtle rhythms that indicated whether a machine was healthy or struggling. Her father had taught her that helicopters were different from other aircraft in fundamental ways. Airplanes wanted to fly, he'd often said, but helicopters had to be convinced. Every flight was a negotiation between human intention and mechanical reality, requiring equipment that operated in perfect harmony. A single component operating even slightly outside normal parameters could cascade into catastrophic failure, which was why helicopter mechanics developed almost supernatural sensitivity to the subtle signs of impending problems. After high school, Elena had joined the Army with dreams of becoming a pilot herself. She'd scored high on all the aptitude tests and sailed through the initial phases of flight training. But a training accident during her second year had left her with nerve damage in her left hand that ended her flying career before it truly began. Devastated but determined to remain connected to aviation, she'd transferred to the maintenance corps and discovered that fixing helicopters satisfied the same part of her soul that flying them would have. Military service had given her access to training and equipment that most civilian mechanics never experienced. She'd learned to work on the most advanced helicopters in the world, mastering systems that pushed the boundaries of what was mechanically possible. But it had also exposed her to a culture that didn't always appreciate unconventional approaches to problem solving. The military valued procedures and protocols, standardized solutions that could be replicated by any properly trained technician. Elena's intuitive methods, while effective, didn't fit neatly into this framework. After completing her initial enlistment, Elena had spent several years working for civilian helicopter operators. She'd maintained aircraft for emergency medical services, logging companies, and offshore oil platforms. The work was demanding and often dangerous, but it had taught her to extract maximum performance from equipment that was often operating at the edge of its capabilities. Civilian operators couldn't afford to ground aircraft for minor issues, so mechanics learned to find creative solutions that kept helicopters flying safely even when they weren't perfect. The contrast between military and civilian maintenance philosophy had shaped Elena's approach to her craft. She understood the value of following procedures and maintaining strict standards, but she also recognized that real aircraft existed in a more complex reality where strict adherence to manuals wasn't always sufficient. The best mechanics, she'd learned, were those who could navigate both worlds, applying rigorous standards while remaining flexible enough to address problems that didn't fit standard categories. Her return to military service 5 years ago had been motivated by a desire for stability and the opportunity to work on the most advanced helicopters in the world. Fort Meridian's mission appealed to her because search and rescue operations required aircraft to perform in conditions that revealed their true capabilities. These weren't training flights or routine patrols, but missions where mechanical failure could mean the difference between life and death for people depending on rescue. But military culture had evolved during her absence, becoming even more focused on standardization and risk management. The mechanics who thrived in this environment were those who followed procedures exactly and documented every step of their work. Elena's methods, while effective, generated reports that raised questions among supervisors who preferred straightforward explanations. Her solutions worked, but they often couldn't be easily replicated by other mechanics, which made her valuable but also somewhat suspect. The rotor calibration took her until nearly dawn to complete. Each damper had to be adjusted individually, then tested as part of the complete system. Elena used instruments that most mechanics rarely touched, devices that measured vibrations and frequencies so subtle that they barely registered on standard equipment. She made dozens of tiny adjustments, each one based on feedback that she felt through her hands rather than read on displays. As the sun began to rise over the Texas landscape, Elena finally stepped back from the completed repair. The Blackhawk's rotor system now operated with a smoothness that exceeded factory specifications. The micro-vibration that had puzzled four other mechanics was gone, replaced by the perfectly balanced rotation that characterized a helicopter in peak condition. But Elena knew that her work would be questioned because she couldn't fully explain how she'd achieved the result. The morning shift began arriving as Elena cleaned her tools and prepared her report. She could hear the familiar sounds of the base come into life, the distant noise of aircraft engines, and the chatter of personnel beginning another day. Soon, Master Sergeant Morrison would arrive and want to know the status of the problem aircraft. Elena would have to explain her solution to people who might not understand her methods, justifying a repair that worked but didn't follow standard procedures. She looked up at the Blackhawk one more time, noting the way the morning light reflected off its polished surfaces. In a few hours, this aircraft would be flying again, carrying crews on missions that might save lives. The people who depended on it would never know about the subtle vibration that could have eventually led to component failure, or about the mechanic who'd spent 14 hours ensuring their safety. Elena was used to this invisibility, accustomed to being the person who solved problems that others couldn't see. But today felt different somehow. As she gathered her tools and prepared to face questions about her unconventional methods, Elena had the strange feeling that her work on this particular helicopter would lead to something more significant than just another successful repair. She couldn't explain this intuition any more than she could fully explain how she diagnosed the rotor problem, but her instincts had served her well for too many years to ignore them now. The invisible mechanic who worked the night shift in Hangar 7 was about to discover that sometimes the most important recognition comes from the most unexpected sources. And sometimes, the skills that make you different are exactly the skills that make you legendary. The morning briefing room at Fort Meridian buzzed with the controlled energy of pilots preparing for another day of operations. Captain Marcus Sterling sat in the front row, his flight suit crisp despite the early hour, reviewing the mission parameters for what should have been a routine training exercise. At 32, he was the youngest flight commander in the 47th Aviation Regiment, a position he'd earned through a combination of exceptional flying skills and an almost supernatural ability to read aircraft behavior that had saved his crew's lives on more than one occasion. But this morning, Marcus felt uneasy in a way he couldn't quite articulate. His assigned aircraft, tail number 847, had been experiencing what maintenance classified as minor vibration anomalies over the past several weeks. 3 different mechanics had examined the helicopter, and all had declared it airworthy. The vibration fell within acceptable parameters, according to every diagnostic test, yet Marcus could feel something wrong in the way the aircraft responded to his inputs. Helicopter pilots developed intimate relationships with their machines, learning to interpret every sound, vibration, and control response as a form of mechanical communication. Marcus had been flying for 12 years, and he'd learned to trust his instincts about aircraft behavior, even when instruments suggested everything was normal. This particular Blackhawk felt subtly different from others in the fleet, as if some fundamental harmony had been disrupted. Chief Warrant Officer Janet Chun, the operations officer, called the briefing to order and began outlining the day's missions: search and rescue training over the Guadalupe Mountains, coordination exercises with local emergency services, and a VIP transport mission that would test their precision flying skills. All routine work for experienced crews, but Marcus remained focused on the nagging concern about his aircraft's condition. After the briefing, Marcus walked across the tarmac toward Hangar 7, where the maintenance crews were conducting pre-flight preparations. The morning sun painted the Texas landscape in shades of gold and amber, and the air carried the familiar sense of jet fuel and hot metal that had become the soundtrack of his professional life. But his attention was focused entirely on finding Master Sergeant Morrison and getting definitive answers about his helicopter's condition. He found Morrison in the hangar office, reviewing maintenance logs with the intensity of someone trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle. The sergeant looked up as Marcus approached, his expression immediately becoming defensive in the way that mechanics adopt when pilots question their work. "Captain Sterling," Morrison said, closing the logbook with perhaps more force than necessary, "I assume you're here about 847. I can tell you for the 4th time that aircraft is completely airworthy. Every system checks out perfectly." Marcus chose his words carefully. He'd learned that challenging maintenance decisions required diplomatic skill, especially when the mechanics were technically correct, according to official standards. "I'm not questioning your work, Sergeant, but I can feel something in the controls that doesn't match the other aircraft in our fleet. The vibration pattern has changed over the past month." Morrison's expression softened slightly. He respected pilots who paid attention to subtle changes in aircraft behavior, even when those changes couldn't be quantified by diagnostic equipment. "Look, Captain, I've had my 3 best people examine that bird from nose to tail. Rodriguez spent 2 days on it. Patterson ran every test in the book. Chun recommended a complete rotor replacement, but that would ground you for 6 weeks and cost more than most people make in a year." "What about the night shift?" Marcus asked. "I heard someone was working on 847 yesterday evening." Morrison paused, his expression becoming more complex. "Vasquez worked on it. She thinks she fixed the problem, but her methods are unconventional. She doesn't always follow standard procedures." The way Morrison said Elena's name carried undertones that Marcus couldn't quite interpret. There was respect there, but also frustration and perhaps a hint of resentment. "What kind of unconventional methods?" "She recalibrated the rotor dampers manually, adjusted each one individually based on some theory about harmonic resonance. It's not a procedure that's covered in any manual, and I can't guarantee that another mechanic could replicate her work." Marcus felt a spark of interest. Pilots who survived long careers learned to recognize mechanics who possessed intuitive understanding of aircraft systems, beyond what could be taught in technical schools. "Is the aircraft ready for flight?" According to her report, yes. She claims the vibration issue is completely resolved. But like I said, her methods raise questions about standardization and reproducibility. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Military aviation demanded adherence to established procedures for good reasons, but he'd also encountered situations where conventional approaches fell short of addressing complex problems. "I'd like to speak with her before we fly." Morrison checked his watch. "She'll be here for another hour before her shift ends. You'll find her in the far corner of the hangar, Area 7. But Captain, I need to know if you're not comfortable flying 847. I can assign you a different aircraft. Let me talk to the mechanic first, Marcus replied. Then I'll make that decision. Elena was cleaning her workspace when Marcus approached, organizing tools with the methodical precision that characterized everything she did. She looked up as his shadow fell across her work area, taking in the pilot's wings on his flight suit and the captain's bars that identified his rank. Her expression remained neutral, but Marcus detected a subtle wariness in her posture. Ms. Vasquez, I'm Captain Sterling, the pilot assigned to aircraft 847. I understand you worked on the rotor system yesterday. Elena set down the wrench she'd been cleaning and faced him directly. Years of military service had taught her to read officers quickly, and this pilot seemed different from the others who occasionally visited the maintenance area. His questions would be more substantive than the usual complaints about minor inconveniences. Yes, sir. I addressed the vibration anomaly that was affecting rotor smoothness. The aircraft should now operate within optimal parameters. Marcus studied her carefully. Elena's response was professional and precise, but it didn't reveal much about her diagnostic process or repair methods. The other mechanics weren't able to identify the source of the problem. What did you find that they missed? Elena hesitated for a moment, calculating how much detail to include in her explanation. Pilots varied widely in their technical knowledge, and she'd learned that some preferred simple answers while others wanted comprehensive understanding. The issue was harmonic resonance caused by mismatched damper frequencies in the rotor head. Assembly. One damper was a replacement part from a different manufacturer, creating subtle variations that became amplified under specific flight conditions. I recalibrated the entire set to operate in perfect harmony. Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly. This was far more technical detail than he'd expected, and Elena's explanation demonstrated understanding that went well beyond basic repair procedures. How did you identify this problem when diagnostic equipment didn't detect it? Diagnostic equipment measures individual components against specifications, Elena replied. But aircraft systems are interconnected webs where small variations can create larger problems. I could feel the resonance pattern through the metal structure, and it matched a similar issue I'd encountered years ago on a different aircraft. You could feel it through the metal? Marcus asked, genuine curiosity replacing his initial skepticism. Elena nodded, extending her hand toward the nearest helicopter. Metal conducts vibrations at specific frequencies. When you spend enough time working with these systems, you develop sensitivity to variations that instruments might miss. It's like learning to read a language that's written in mechanical responses rather than words. Marcus was impressed despite himself. He'd encountered very few mechanics who spoke about aircraft systems with this level of intuitive understanding. Most technicians relied heavily on diagnostic equipment and procedure manuals, approaching repairs as logical sequences of steps rather than conversations with living machines. How long have you been working on helicopters? He asked. 23 years total, Elena replied. Military and civilian experience. I learned on aircraft that were too old and too valuable to replace, where understanding subtle mechanical communications was essential for keeping them airworthy. Something in her tone caught Marcus's attention. There was depth there, layers of experience that suggested she'd encountered situations that had tested her skills in ways that routine military maintenance rarely did. Where did you develop this kind of diagnostic ability? Elena's expression became more guarded. She wasn't accustomed to pilots showing genuine interest in her background, and she'd learned to be cautious about revealing too much personal information to officers who might not understand or appreciate unconventional approaches to mechanical problems. Various places, she said carefully. Emergency medical services, offshore operations, search and rescue. Environments where aircraft failure wasn't just inconvenient, it was potentially fatal. You learn to hear what machines are trying to tell you when lives depend on keeping them running. Marcus felt a familiar recognition, the sense of meeting someone who understood aviation at a level that went beyond technical competence. He'd encountered this quality in a few exceptional pilots during his career, but never in a mechanic. Most maintenance personnel he'd worked with were skilled professionals who followed established procedures effectively, but Elena seemed to possess something rarer. "I'd like to conduct a test flight with you observing," he said suddenly. "Would you be willing to monitor the aircraft's performance during flight operations?" Elena was surprised by the request. Mechanics occasionally flew as observers during test flights, but such arrangements were typically formal affairs involving supervisors and extensive documentation. This pilot seemed to be suggesting something more informal. "I'm not sure that would be approved through normal channels," she replied carefully. Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the hangar. "Leave the approvals to me. I'm more interested in having someone monitor the aircraft who understands what to look for. If your repair was successful, I'd like confirmation from the person who identified the original problem." Elena considered the offer. She'd flown in helicopters countless times during her military service, but always as a passenger or during routine maintenance checks. The opportunity to observe her repair work from the pilot's perspective was appealing, even if it meant dealing with potential administrative complications. "When were you planning this test flight?" she asked. "This afternoon, if maintenance approvals can be expedited." "Nothing elaborate, just basic flight operations to verify that the vibration issue has been resolved." Elena nodded slowly. "I'll need to coordinate with Sergeant Morrison, but I think that could be arranged." Marcus extended his hand, and Elena shook it firmly. Her grip was strong and confident, calloused from years of working with tools and machinery. "Thank you, Ms. Vasquez. I have a feeling this is going to be an interesting flight." As the pilot walked away, Elena returned to organizing her tools, but her mind was occupied with the unexpected conversation. Most pilots treated mechanics as service providers whose job was to keep aircraft operational without requiring detailed explanations of their methods. This Captain Sterling seemed different, genuinely interested in understanding the technical aspects of aircraft performance. The test flight arrangement required several hours of coordination between different departments. Sergeant Morrison was initially skeptical about the informal nature of the request, but Captain Sterling's reputation for thorough preparation ultimately convinced him to approve Elena's participation. The flight would be documented as a post-maintenance verification, with Elena listed as a technical observer. Elena spent the remainder of her shift preparing for the flight, reviewing her repair documentation and gathering instruments that might be useful for monitoring rotor performance during flight operations. She'd participated in dozens of test flights during her career, but this felt different somehow. The pilot's genuine interest in her technical opinions suggested that this might be more than a routine verification. The afternoon sun was intense as Elena walked across the tarmac toward the flight line where Captain Sterling was conducting his pre-flight inspection. Aircraft 847 sat gleaming in the heat, its rotor blades secured in the maintenance position while ground crews completed their final preparations. Elena could see the pilot moving systematically around the helicopter, checking every external component with the thoroughness that characterized experienced aviators. She joined Sterling beside the aircraft, carrying a small bag of monitoring equipment and wearing the flight suit that all aircrew members were required to use during operations. The pilot looked up from his inspection checklist and nodded approvingly at her professional appearance. "Ready to see how your repair performs in flight?" he asked. Elena nodded, feeling a mixture of confidence and nervous anticipation. Her analysis of the rotor problem had been thorough, and she was certain that her calibration work had addressed the underlying issue. But aircraft systems were complex webs of interrelated components, and it was always possible that fixing one problem might reveal others. "I've brought some additional monitoring equipment," she said, indicating her equipment bag. If there are any residual issues, we should be able to detect them during flight operations. Sterling completed his external inspection and gestured toward the aircraft. Let's get airborne and see what this bird can do. The next hour would prove to be a turning point in Elena's career, though she had no way of knowing it as she climbed into the helicopter's cabin. The test flight would demonstrate not only the success of her repair work, but also reveal capabilities that would capture the attention of people far beyond Fort Meridian. Sometimes recognition comes not from seeking it, but from simply doing exceptional work when the opportunity presents itself. As the Blackhawk's engines spooled up and the rotor blades began their familiar rotation, Elena felt the vibrations that told her everything she needed to know about the aircraft's condition. The harmonic resonance that had troubled the helicopter for weeks was gone, replaced by the smooth mechanical symphony that characterized a perfectly balanced rotor system. But she had no idea that the pilot beside her was about to recognize something in her work that would change everything. The helicopter lifted off the tarmac with a smoothness that immediately caught Marcus's attention. He'd flown this particular aircraft dozens of times over the past months, always fighting the subtle vibration that made precision flying more difficult than it should have been. Now the controls responded with a crispness that reminded him of brand new aircraft fresh from the factory. As they climbed toward their test altitude, Marcus began putting the helicopter through a series of maneuvers designed to stress the rotor system in ways that would reveal any remaining problems. Steep turns, rapid altitude changes, and precision hovering that demanded maximum performance from every component. Elena monitored her instruments while observing the pilot's technique, noting the way he pushed the aircraft to its limits while maintaining complete control. But something else was happening that neither of them initially recognized. As Marcus flew with the newfound precision that Elena's repair had restored, his natural flying style began to emerge more clearly. Without the distraction of constant micro-vibrations, his control inputs became more fluid and intuitive. He began flying the helicopter not just as a machine to be controlled, but as an extension of his own capabilities. Elena noticed it first in the way the aircraft responded to Marcus's commands. Most pilots flew helicopters through a series of discrete control inputs, making corrections and adjustments in response to changing conditions. But Marcus seemed to be having a continuous conversation with the aircraft, his control movements flowing seamlessly from one maneuver to the next, in patterns that looked almost choreographed. As they progressed through the test sequence, Elena realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. This pilot wasn't just competent or even excellent. He was flying with a level of intuitive understanding that she'd rarely seen in her decades of aviation experience. His control of the aircraft was so precise and fluid that it bordered on artistic expression. During a particularly complex maneuver that involved transitioning from high-speed flight to precision hovering near a designated ground target, Elena observed something that made her catch her breath. Marcus's control inputs created a signature pattern in the aircraft's response that was unlike anything she'd seen from other pilots. The helicopter moved through the air with a grace and precision that seemed to defy the laws of physics, as if the machine had temporarily transcended its mechanical limitations. Elena had worked on hundreds of helicopters and flown with dozens of pilots during her career. She'd seen competent flying, skilled flying, and occasionally exceptional flying. But she'd only heard stories about pilots who could make aircraft perform in ways that seemed almost supernatural, aviators whose understanding of flight dynamics reached levels that bordered on legend. As the test flight continued, Elena began to recognize patterns in Marcus's flying that matched descriptions she'd heard from older mechanics who'd worked with truly legendary pilots. The way he anticipated aircraft responses before they occurred. The seamless integration of multiple control inputs that created flight paths of impossible smoothness. Most tellingly, The way the helicopter seemed to respond to his intentions rather than just his physical commands. When they finally returned to base and touched down on the flight line, Elena was quiet for several moments as the engines wound down. Marcus completed his post-flight procedures and turned to ask about her assessment of the aircraft's performance, but he found her staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Did you detect any problems with the rotor system?" Elena shook her head slowly. "The rotor system performed flawlessly. But Captain, can I ask you about your flight training background?" Marcus looked puzzled by the question. "Standard military progression. Flight school, advanced training, operational assignments. Why do you ask? Where did you learn to fly like that?" Elena asked, her voice carrying a note of awe that surprised them both. "Like what?" Marcus replied, genuinely confused by her reaction. Elena hesitated, trying to find words for something that defied easy description. "Captain, I've worked with hundreds of pilots during my career. I've seen good flying and great flying. But what you just demonstrated up there was something different. That wasn't just technical skill. That was artistry." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the praise, unsure how to respond to Elena's obvious admiration. "I just fly the aircraft according to its capabilities. Nothing special about it. Sir, with respect, what you just did was very special. I've heard older mechanics talk about pilots who could make aircraft perform beyond their design specifications. Aviators who seem to understand flight at an almost mystical level. I always thought those were just stories until today." Elena's words carried a weight that Marcus couldn't dismiss. She wasn't offering casual compliments or trying to flatter a superior officer. Her assessment was coming from someone who clearly understood aircraft performance at a level that went far beyond basic technical knowledge. "What exactly did you observe that seemed unusual?" he asked. Elena gathered her thoughts, trying to articulate something that she'd never had to describe before. "It's in the way the aircraft responds to your inputs. Most pilots control helicopters through a series of commands and corrections. But you were conducting a conversation with the machine, as if you could sense its responses before they occurred. The flight paths you achieved shouldn't have been possible with that level of smoothness." Marcus considered her words carefully. He'd always known that he had unusual sensitivity to aircraft behavior, but he'd assumed that all experienced pilots developed similar capabilities over time. The suggestion that his flying style was somehow exceptional was both flattering and unsettling. "How can you tell the difference?" he asked. "What specific things did you observe?" Elena smiled, recognizing the same curiosity about technical details that had driven her own career development. "It's in the mechanical responses I can monitor through my instruments. Most pilots create vibration patterns that reflect the discrete nature of their control inputs. But your flying generates harmonic signatures that are almost perfectly smooth, as if the aircraft is responding to intentions rather than just physical commands." As Elena explained her observations, Marcus began to understand that he'd encountered someone whose technical expertise might be as exceptional as her assessment of his flying abilities. The depth of her analysis went far beyond what he'd expected from a maintenance technician, revealing understanding that approached the level of engineering insight. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Morrison, who'd come out to the flight line to check on the test results. His expression was professionally neutral, but Marcus could detect underlying concern about how the informal evaluation had proceeded. "How did the aircraft perform, Captain?" Morrison asked, his tone carefully respectful but clearly seeking definitive answers about the helicopter's airworthiness. "Flawlessly," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Whatever Ms. Vasquez did to fix the vibration problem worked perfectly. This aircraft now performs better than most others in our fleet." Morrison looked relieved, but also somewhat surprised by the enthusiastic endorsement. "So you're satisfied with the repair work?" "More than satisfied," Marcus said, glancing at Elena. I'd like to request that Ms. Vasquez be assigned to work on my aircraft for all future maintenance issues." Elena felt a surge of surprise and gratification. Individual aircraft assignments were unusual in military maintenance operations, where mechanics typically worked on whatever helicopters required attention. The pilot's request suggested a level of confidence in her abilities that she'd rarely experienced from aircrew members. Morrison nodded slowly. "I'll see what can be arranged. Ms. Vasquez does excellent work, even if her methods are sometimes unconventional." As the maintenance supervisor walked away, Marcus turned back to Elena with an expression that suggested he was still processing their earlier conversation. "Ms. Vasquez, would you be interested in flying with me again? I'd like to get your technical perspective on how this aircraft compares to others in the fleet." Elena felt her heart rate increase slightly. The opportunity to fly regularly with a pilot of Marcus's caliber was more appealing than she wanted to admit. But she also sensed that accepting his offer might lead to complications with the formal hierarchy that governed military operations. "I'd be honored to provide technical support for your operations," she replied carefully. "But such arrangements would need to be coordinated through proper channels." Marcus smiled, recognizing her diplomatic response to a potentially complex situation. "Of course. But I have a feeling that proper channels might be more receptive to unusual arrangements when they understand the performance improvements we can achieve." As Elena gathered her equipment and prepared to return to the hangar, she reflected on the unexpected turn her day had taken. What had started as a routine test flight had evolved into something that felt like the beginning of an important professional relationship. But more than that, she'd witnessed flying that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with aviation in the first place. The invisible mechanic who'd spent years solving problems that others couldn't see had encountered a pilot whose abilities transcended normal categories of skill. Neither of them yet understood how significantly this meeting would change their careers, but both sensed that they'd found someone who understood their respective crafts at a level that few people ever achieved. Marcus walked back toward the squadron building, his mind occupied with Elena's assessment of his flying abilities. He'd always known that he had unusual sensitivity to aircraft behavior, but her technical analysis suggested that his skills might be more exceptional than he'd realized. The possibility that he was unknowingly demonstrating legendary-level flying ability was both exciting and intimidating. Elena returned to her workspace in Hangar 7, but found it difficult to concentrate on routine maintenance tasks. The flight had confirmed her technical analysis of the rotor problem while revealing something even more significant. She'd encountered a pilot whose abilities matched the stories that older mechanics told about legendary aviators from earlier eras of military aviation. Neither of them could predict that their professional relationship was about to attract attention from people far beyond Fort Meridian, or that Elena's ability to recognize exceptional flying would soon make her one of the most sought-after technical experts in military aviation. The test flight had been successful beyond their expectations, but its most important consequences were still to come. The emergency klaxon shattered the pre-dawn silence at Fort Meridian with urgent wails that sent personnel scrambling across the base. Elena jerked awake in her quarters, instantly alert despite having worked a double shift the previous day. Emergency calls during off-duty hours meant only one thing: a search and rescue mission, where every minute could mean the difference between life and death for someone stranded in the unforgiving wilderness of West Texas. She was dressed and heading toward Hangar 7 before the second alarm cycle completed, her mind already shifting into the focused state that had defined her approach to critical maintenance work for over 2 decades. Emergency missions demanded aircraft that performed flawlessly under extreme conditions, and Elena knew that her expertise might be the determining factor in whether those aircraft could complete their life-saving tasks. The hangar was already buzzing with controlled chaos as she arrived. Ground crews were pulling aircraft out of maintenance status, while pilots conducted rapid briefings on mission parameters. The emergency involved a medical helicopter that had gone down during a routine transport flight in the Guadalupe Mountains, carrying a critically injured child and a medical team to a hospital in El Paso. Initial reports suggested mechanical failure, but weather conditions in the crash area were deteriorating rapidly. Captain Sterling stood near aircraft 847, conducting his pre-flight inspection with the systematic thoroughness that Elena had come to associate with his professional approach. When he saw her entering the hangar, he immediately walked over with an expression that mixed relief with professional urgency. "Elena, thank God you're here," he said, abandoning the formal address structure they'd maintained during their previous interactions. "We've got a complex rescue mission, and I need aircraft that will perform perfectly under difficult conditions. Are you confident in 847's current status?" Elena nodded without hesitation. "She's operating at peak performance. All systems are optimized, and the rotor modifications I implemented last month have actually improved her capabilities beyond manufacturer specifications." Marcus felt a familiar surge of confidence that came from working with someone whose technical expertise he'd learned to trust completely. Over the past 6 months, Elena had become his preferred maintenance specialist, and their professional relationship had evolved into something approaching true partnership. She understood his flying style well enough to configure aircraft systems in ways that maximized his capabilities, while he'd learned to interpret her technical assessments with the respect they deserved. "What's the mission profile?" Elena asked, her mind already calculating the mechanical stresses that different flight operations would place on helicopter systems. "Multi-phase rescue in mountainous terrain," Marcus replied, consulting his mission notes. "We'll be operating at high altitude with minimal landing zones, potentially in severe weather conditions. The downed aircraft is carrying 3 survivors, including the injured child, but access will require precision flying in environments that push every system to its limits." Elena felt her pulse quicken with the familiar combination of professional excitement and responsibility that came with supporting critical missions. These were the moments when her years of experience and intuitive understanding of aircraft systems became most valuable, when the difference between adequate maintenance and exceptional preparation could determine mission success. "I want to fly with you as technical support," she said, the words emerging before she'd fully considered their implications. Marcus looked surprised by her request. While Elena had accompanied him on several test flights over the past months, embedding civilian maintenance personnel in active rescue missions was highly unusual and required approvals that might not be available given the time constraints they faced. "Elena, you know I'd value having you aboard, but the authorization process for non-essential personnel on emergency missions is complex. We might not have time to work through the administrative requirements." "I'm not non-essential personnel," Elena replied with quiet conviction. "I'm the technical specialist who knows this aircraft better than anyone else on the base. If mechanical problems develop during the mission, having me aboard could mean the difference between successful rescue and catastrophic failure." Marcus considered her argument while calculating the risks and benefits of her proposal. Elena's technical expertise had proven invaluable during routine operations, and her understanding of aircraft systems often revealed problems before they became critical failures. But emergency missions carried inherent dangers that made every personnel decision a matter of life and death. "What specific technical support would you provide?" he asked. Elena's response came without hesitation, reflecting months of thinking about how her skills could be applied to operational missions rather than just maintenance activities. Real-time systems monitoring, predictive failure analysis, and immediate troubleshooting of mechanical problems that might develop under extreme operating conditions. "I can detect system degradation before it reaches critical levels and recommend operational modifications that maintain mission capability." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Major Patricia Hendricks, the squadron commander, whose presence indicated the high priority being assigned to the rescue mission. She approached Marcus and Elena with the brisk efficiency that characterized her leadership style during crisis situations. "Captain Sterling, what's your aircraft status?" she asked. "Fully mission capable, ma'am," Marcus replied. "Ms. Vasquez has this bird performing better than factory specifications." Major Hendricks looked at Elena with an expression that mixed professional assessment with curiosity. Elena's reputation for exceptional maintenance work had reached command levels, but her request to participate in active missions represented a significant departure from standard operating procedures. "Ms. Vasquez, I understand you're requesting to fly as technical support for this mission," the major said. "Yes, ma'am," Elena replied. "My familiarity with this aircraft systems could prove critical if mechanical problems develop during high-stress operations." Major Hendricks weighed the unusual request against the mission requirements and Elena's established track record of technical excellence. Emergency rescue operations demanded every possible advantage, and Elena's expertise represented a resource that might prove invaluable under challenging conditions. "Approved," she said finally. "But understand that you'll be operating under combat conditions where your technical decisions could affect mission success and crew safety. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility?" Elena felt a surge of anticipation mixed with professional determination. This was the opportunity she'd unconsciously been preparing for throughout her career, the chance to apply her technical expertise directly to life-saving operations rather than just supporting them from the ground. "Yes, ma'am," she replied. "I'm ready." The next hour was a whirlwind of mission preparation as Elena gathered specialized monitoring equipment while Marcus coordinated with other aircraft and ground support teams. The rescue operation would involve multiple helicopters working in complex coordination, with Elena's aircraft serving as the primary extraction platform due to its superior performance characteristics. As they lifted off from Fort Meridian and headed toward the mountains, Elena found herself experiencing military aviation from an entirely new perspective. Instead of conducting routine test flights or maintenance evaluations, she was participating in an active mission where her technical expertise could directly impact the survival of people, depending on their success. The flight toward the crash site revealed the challenging conditions they would face. Weather systems moving through the mountains created turbulence and visibility problems that tested even Marcus's exceptional flying skills. Elena monitored aircraft systems while observing how environmental stresses affected helicopter performance, noting subtle changes in engine parameters and rotor behavior that less experienced mechanics might have missed. "Systems are responding well to current conditions," she reported through the intercom. "Engine temperatures are within optimal ranges and rotor performance remains stable despite the turbulence." Marcus felt reassured by Elena's professional assessment, but he could also sense underlying tension in her voice that reflected the gravity of their mission. They were approaching the limits of normal helicopter operations, entering an environment where mechanical reliability would be tested by conditions that pushed every system toward its maximum capabilities. The crash site appeared below them as a scattered debris field on a narrow mountain ledge that barely provided enough space for helicopter operations. The downed medical helicopter lay on its side, damaged but intact enough to suggest that survivors might still be viable. But accessing the site would require precision flying that left no margin for error or mechanical failure. "Elena, I'm going to need maximum performance from every system," Marcus said as he began his approach. "We'll be operating at the edge of this aircraft's flight envelope." "All systems are optimized for peak performance," Elena replied, her voice carrying the confidence that came from absolute certainty in her technical preparations. "She'll give you everything you need." The rescue operation that followed would become legendary within military aviation circles, though Elena had no way of knowing it as she monitored aircraft systems during the most challenging flying she'd ever witnessed. Marcus maneuvered the helicopter through wind patterns and terrain obstacles that seemed to defy the laws of physics, placing the aircraft in positions that allowed the rescue team to extract survivors from locations that should have been inaccessible. But Elena's contribution went far beyond passive monitoring. When engine temperatures began climbing toward dangerous levels due to the sustained high-power operations required for mountain flying, she identified cooling system modifications that could be implemented in flight. When rotor vibrations increased, due to the extreme flight attitudes required for accessing the crash site, she recognized the early signs of harmonic resonance and provided guidance that allowed Marcus to adjust his flying technique to minimize system stress. Most significantly, when one of the hydraulic systems began showing signs of pressure loss that could have led to control system failure, Elena detected the problem through subtle changes in system parameters that wouldn't have triggered warning alerts for several more minutes. Her early warning allowed Marcus to adjust his flight profile and complete the rescue operation before the system degradation reached critical levels. The successful extraction of all 3 survivors, including the critically injured child who was transported to definitive medical care, was attributed to exceptional flying skills and outstanding crew coordination. But those familiar with helicopter operations recognized that the mission's success had depended equally on technical expertise that anticipated and prevented mechanical failures under extreme conditions. The flight back to Fort Meridian was subdued, with crew members processing the intensity of what they'd just accomplished. Elena found herself experiencing a profound sense of satisfaction that went beyond the successful completion of her maintenance responsibilities. She'd contributed directly to saving lives, applying her technical expertise in ways that had immediate and tangible impact on human survival. Marcus broke the contemplative silence as they approached the base. "Elena, what you did up there was extraordinary. The way you monitored systems and predicted problems before they became critical, that's not standard technical support. That's something else entirely." Elena felt a warmth of recognition that was different from the professional satisfaction she'd experienced after successful maintenance work. "This is what I've been preparing for my entire career, even if I didn't realize it. Using technical expertise to directly support operations, rather than just maintaining equipment. You saved that mission," Marcus continued. "Without your system monitoring and predictive analysis, we would have faced mechanical failures that could have prevented the rescue." As they landed and began post-flight procedures, Elena realized that something fundamental had changed in how she viewed her role within military aviation. She was no longer just a maintenance specialist who fixed problems after they occurred. She'd become an operational asset whose technical expertise could be applied directly to mission success. The recognition came swiftly and from unexpected directions. Within hours of their return, Elena received a phone call from Colonel Sarah Martinez, the regimental commander, requesting a detailed briefing on her technical contributions to the rescue mission. Word of her performance had reached levels of command that rarely paid attention to individual maintenance personnel. The briefing took place in the regimental conference room, with senior officers from across the base in attendance. Elena found herself presenting technical analysis to audiences that included pilots, engineers, and commanders whose decisions affected entire aviation programs. But instead of feeling intimidated, she discovered that her years of technical expertise had prepared her for exactly this kind of professional recognition. "Ms. Vasquez," Colonel Martinez began, "we've received reports that your technical monitoring during yesterday's rescue mission prevented multiple system failures that could have compromised mission success. Can you walk us through your analysis?" Elena opened her technical notebook and began explaining the systematic approach she'd used to monitor aircraft performance during extreme operations. Her presentation covered predictive failure analysis, real-time system optimization, and the integration of technical expertise with operational flying that had enabled the successful rescue. But as she spoke, Elena realized that her audience was understanding something beyond just her technical contributions to a single mission. They were recognizing a new paradigm for how maintenance expertise could be integrated with operational activities to achieve performance levels that neither could accomplish independently. "What you're describing," said Major Thompson, the base engineering officer, "represents a fundamental change in how we think about technical support for complex operations. Instead of reactive maintenance, you're proposing proactive technical integration." Elena nodded, feeling a growing sense of excitement as she recognized that her approach to helicopter maintenance was being understood as something larger than individual technical skills. "Exactly, sir. Aircraft systems are too complex and missions are too critical to rely on after-the-fact problem-solving. Technical expertise needs to be integrated into operations from the beginning." The questions that followed revealed the depth of interest her approach had generated among senior leadership. Officers wanted to understand how her methods could be applied to other aircraft in different types of missions. Engineers sought details about her diagnostic techniques and predictive analysis capabilities. Pilots asked about the potential for integrating similar technical support into their own operations. Colonel Martinez concluded the briefing with an announcement that surprised everyone, including Elena. "Ms. Vasquez, based on your demonstrated capabilities and the potential applications of your technical approach, I'm recommending you for assignment to the Advanced Aviation Systems program at the Pentagon. They're developing new paradigms for technical support integration, and your experience represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking they need." Elena felt her world shift fundamentally as she absorbed the implications of the colonel's announcement. The Pentagon assignment would represent a complete transformation of her career, moving from individual maintenance work to program development that could affect military aviation across all services. "Ma'am, I'm honored by the recommendation," she replied, "but I want to ensure that any program development maintains focus on direct operational support rather than just theoretical advancement." Colonel Martinez smiled, recognizing Elena's commitment to practical applications over bureaucratic prestige. "That's exactly why you're the right person for this assignment. They need someone who understands both the technical details and the operational realities." The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation and transition as Elena documented her maintenance methods and prepared for her new role. Captain Sterling worked closely with her to ensure that Aircraft 847 would continue performing at peak levels even without her direct involvement. But both of them understood that their professional partnership had evolved into something that transcended individual assignments. "Elena," Marcus said during their final flight together, "you've changed how I think about the relationship between pilots and technical support. What we accomplished together represents a new standard for aviation excellence." Elena looked out at the Texas landscape passing below them, reflecting on the journey that had brought her from invisible night shift mechanic to Pentagon program developer. "We proved that exceptional results come from combining technical expertise with operational excellence. Neither of us could have achieved what we accomplished together, working independently." Her assignment to the Pentagon's Advanced Aviation Systems program marked the beginning of a new phase in military aviation, where technical expertise was integrated into operations from the initial planning stages rather than applied reactively. When problems developed, Elena's methods became the foundation for training programs that taught mechanics to think like operational assets rather than just maintenance personnel. But the most significant impact of her transformation was personal rather than professional. Elena had discovered that her technical expertise, when applied with confidence and integrated with exceptional operational capabilities, could contribute directly to saving lives and achieving mission success at levels she'd never imagined possible. The invisible mechanic who'd spent years fixing problems that others couldn't see had become a recognized innovator whose approaches influenced how military aviation integrated technical and operational excellence. Her journey from the corner of Hangar 7 to the Pentagon represented not just individual career advancement, but the recognition that exceptional technical expertise deserved the same respect and integration opportunities as any other form of military excellence. As Elena prepared for her new assignment, she reflected on the helicopter rotor problem that had started everything. What had seemed like routine maintenance work had revealed capabilities that she'd possessed without fully recognizing their potential. Sometimes transformation comes not from seeking recognition, but from applying exceptional skills with confidence when opportunities present themselves. The legendary flight signature that Captain Sterling had recognized wasn't just about technical competence. It was the expression of someone who understood aircraft systems at levels that enabled her to support operational excellence rather than just maintain mechanical functionality. Elena had become legendary not through self-promotion, but through the simple act of applying her expertise with complete dedication to mission success. Her story would inspire a generation of maintenance personnel to see their roles as integral to operational success rather than just supporting activities. The invisible mechanic had become unforgettable, and her methods would influence military aviation for decades to come. The Pentagon corridors felt like arteries of power, carrying the lifeblood of military decision-making through endless hallways, lined with portraits of distinguished officers and displays of historical achievements. Elena walked these corridors with measured steps, her civilian clothes feeling strange after years of military uniforms and coveralls. The Advanced Aviation Systems program occupied a section of the building that buzzed with the controlled energy of people working on projects that could reshape how America's military forces operated in the decades to come. Her new office was modest but strategically located, with windows that overlooked the Potomac River and walls that would soon be covered with technical diagrams and aircraft performance data. But Elena's attention was focused on the stack of briefing materials that awaited her review, documents that outlined the scope and expectations of her new role as Senior Technical Integration Specialist. The program director, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, had made it clear during Elena's initial briefing that her assignment represented a significant investment in unproven concepts. Military aviation had operated for decades under the assumption that technical expertise in operational flying existed in separate domains, with mechanics maintaining aircraft and pilots operating them according to established procedures. Elena's demonstrated ability to integrate these functions during actual missions had attracted attention precisely because it challenged fundamental assumptions about how aviation systems should work. Ms. Vasquez, Dr. Walsh had explained, your success at Fort Meridian suggests that we may have been artificially limiting our operational capabilities by maintaining rigid separation between technical and operational functions. If your methods can be systematized and taught to others, we could be looking at revolutionary improvements in mission effectiveness across all aviation platforms. Elena understood the implications of this opportunity, but she also recognized the challenges inherent in translating her intuitive methods into formal training programs. Her diagnostic abilities had developed through decades of hands-on experience with aircraft that operated under conditions that pushed every system to its limits. Teaching others to achieve similar results would require identifying the specific elements of her approach that could be communicated and replicated. Her first assignment involved analyzing mission data from helicopter operations across different military branches, identifying patterns where technical problems had compromised operational effectiveness. The data painted a sobering picture of how frequently missions failed or fell short of objectives due to mechanical issues that might have been prevented with more sophisticated technical monitoring. Elena spent her initial weeks immersed in case studies that revealed the hidden costs of traditional approaches to aircraft maintenance. Emergency landings due to systems failures that could have been predicted hours earlier. Mission aborts caused by problems that experienced technical specialists might have anticipated based on subtle performance indicators. Most significantly, operational limitations imposed by conservative maintenance practices that prioritized equipment preservation over mission capability. The pattern that emerged from her analysis was clear but disturbing. Military aviation was sacrificing operational effectiveness for the sake of administrative convenience, maintaining artificial separation between technical expertise and mission execution that reduced overall system performance. Elena's methods represented a potential solution, but implementing them would require overcoming institutional resistance to changes that challenged established hierarchies and procedures. Her breakthrough came during a presentation to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, where Elena was asked to explain how technical integration could improve operational outcomes for specific mission types. Instead of offering theoretical explanations, she requested permission to demonstrate her methods using real aircraft and active duty personnel who had volunteered to participate in the evaluation process. The demonstration took place at Andrews Air Force Base using aircraft and crews from different services. Elena worked with pilots from the Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps, showing how real-time technical monitoring could enhance their operational capabilities rather than restricting them. The results exceeded even her own expectations, with participating aircraft achieving performance improvements that ranged from 15 to 30% across various mission parameters. But the most significant impact was on the participating pilots themselves. Officers who had initially been skeptical about civilian technical specialists became enthusiastic advocates for Elena's methods once they experienced the enhanced capabilities that technical integration provided. Captain Sterling had flown from Fort Meridian to participate in the demonstration, and his testimony about their operational partnership carried particular weight with senior leadership. General Morrison, Marcus had told the Air Force Chief of Staff, "Working with Miss Vasquez changed how I understand the relationship between pilot and aircraft. Instead of fighting mechanical limitations, I learned to work with technical expertise to achieve performance levels I never thought possible. Every pilot in our inventory should have access to this kind of technical support." The endorsements from operational personnel provided Elena with the credibility she needed to overcome bureaucratic resistance to her proposed changes. Within 6 months of her Pentagon assignment, she had developed a comprehensive training program that could teach selected maintenance personnel to function as operational technical specialists rather than traditional mechanics. The program's first graduates were drawn from the most experienced maintenance personnel across all services, individuals who possessed both technical expertise and the judgment necessary to make real-time decisions during critical operations. Elena personally supervised their training, sharing not just her diagnostic methods, but the philosophical approach that allowed technical specialists to function as true partners with operational crews. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos became Elena's first success story, demonstrating during training exercises that she could apply Elena's methods to achieve results that matched the original demonstrations. But more importantly, Maria proved that Elena's approach could be taught to others, validating the concept that technical integration represented a learnable skill set rather than just individual intuitive ability. "Elena," Maria told her after completing a particularly challenging training exercise, "you've taught me to hear what aircraft are trying to communicate. I always had the technical knowledge, but I never understood how to apply it in real-time operational contexts. Now I feel like I'm having conversations with these machines instead of just fixing them when they break." The success of Elena's training program attracted international attention as allied nations sought to understand and adapt her methods for their own aviation operations. NATO requested briefings on technical integration concepts, while Pacific allies sent personnel to observe training exercises and learn how Elena's approach might be applied to their own aircraft and operational requirements. But Elena's most significant achievement was the cultural transformation she helped create within military aviation. The artificial barriers between technical expertise and operational flying began to dissolve as more personnel experienced the enhanced capabilities that integration provided. Mechanics began thinking like operational assets, while pilots developed deeper appreciation for the technical complexity that enabled their missions. The program's expansion to include fixed-wing aircraft revealed that Elena's methods had applications far beyond helicopter operations. Fighter pilots discovered that technical integration could enhance their combat effectiveness, while transport crews found that real-time systems monitoring improved their ability to complete missions under challenging conditions. Elena's approach was proving applicable to virtually every aspect of military aviation. Her influence extended beyond individual aircraft to influence acquisition decisions for future aviation systems. Elena consulted with manufacturers during the design phases of new aircraft, ensuring that technical integration capabilities were built into systems from the beginning rather than added as afterthoughts. Her input helped create aircraft that were designed to support the kind of human-machine partnerships that her methods made possible. The transformation of Elena's role from individual maintenance specialist to program innovator reflected broader changes occurring throughout military aviation. The rigid hierarchies and specialized functions that had defined aviation operations were giving way to more flexible approaches that emphasized collaboration and shared expertise. Elena had become a symbol of these changes, demonstrating that exceptional capabilities could emerge from unexpected sources when institutional barriers were removed. Her personal journey from invisible mechanic to Pentagon innovator inspired countless others who possessed specialized knowledge but had never been given opportunities to apply their expertise in operational contexts. Elena's story became a case study in military schools, illustrating how individual excellence could drive systemic improvements when supported by enlightened leadership. But Elena remained focused on the practical applications of her work rather than the recognition it had generated. Every aircraft that flew with enhanced technical support represented lives that might be saved and missions that might succeed, due to the methods she had developed and systematized. Her greatest satisfaction came not from prestigious assignments or professional accolades, but from knowing that her technical expertise was directly contributing to operational success at levels she had never imagined possible. The helicopter rotor problem that had started her journey had taught Elena that exceptional results required combining technical expertise with operational understanding in ways that transcended traditional professional boundaries. Her career transformation from maintenance specialist to program innovator demonstrated that individual excellence, when properly supported and systematically applied, could reshape entire institutional approaches to complex challenges. As Elena looked toward the future of military aviation, she envisioned a world where technical expertise and operational flying were seamlessly integrated from the earliest stages of pilot training and aircraft design. Her methods had proven that such integration was not only possible but essential for achieving the performance levels that future military operations would demand. The invisible mechanic who had once worked alone in the corner of Hangar 7 had become the architect of changes that would influence military aviation for generations to come. Elena's transformation represented more than individual career advancement. It demonstrated that exceptional capabilities, when recognized and properly supported, could drive innovations that benefited entire organizations and the people they served. Her legacy would be measured not in personal achievements, but in the enhanced capabilities of countless pilots and aircraft whose performance had been improved through the application of her methods. Elena had proven that technical expertise deserved the same respect and integration opportunities as any other form of professional excellence, creating new possibilities for human-machine partnerships that push the boundaries of what aviation systems could accomplish. The legendary flight signature that Captain Sterling had recognized in Elena's work had become a new standard for technical excellence that influenced how military aviation approached the integration of human expertise with mechanical systems. Elena's story would continue inspiring others to pursue excellence in their own specialties while seeking opportunities to apply their knowledge in ways that contributed directly to operational success and human welfare. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.